The detention bay hummed with a frequency that made Kestra Vex's crystalline skin shimmer in irritation. As a senior interrogator aboard the Netherian warship Voidcaller, she had questioned hundreds of human prisoners, each one trembling before. Her translucent features and the way light bent around her angular form like captured starfire. Her people, the Netherians, were feared across 3 star systems for good reason. Their empathic abilities could strip away lies and expose the rawest human emotions. But this prisoner was different. She paused outside Cell 7 Alpha, studying. The readouts on her wrist display. Joran Hatch, human male, 32 standard years, captured during a failed supply run to the Kepler mining station. Expected psychological profile: terror, desperation, bargaining attempts. Actual readings: calm, focused, and somehow ... Musical? Kestra frowned, her opalescent eyes narrowing. The bioscanner was detecting rhythmic patterns in the prisoner's vital signs that matched no known stress response. She pressed her palm against the cell door's activation panel, and it slid open with a soft whisper. The sight inside made her freeze. Joran sat cross-legged in the center of the sparse cell, eyes closed, one hand pressed against the wall, while the other moved in precise, deliberate patterns through the air. He was humming not the desperate, broken sounds of a terrified captive, but something structured, complex, beautiful. The ship's ambient vibrations seemed to respond to his voice, creating harmonics that shouldn't have been possible with standard Netherian alloy construction. Fascinating, she said, her voice carrying the melodic undertones common to her species. Most humans spend their first day screaming. Joran's eyes opened warm brown, utterly unafraid, and he smiled. The ships got perfect acoustics. Whoever designed this place understood resonance theory better than most human architects. He gestured to the walls around them. The metal composition creates natural reverb chambers. It's like being inside a massive instrument. Kestra stepped fully into the cell, her form-fitting combat suit adjusting automatically to the confined space. Her empathic sensors, normally flooded with fear and desperation from prisoners, detected only genuine curiosity and a strange sense of appreciation. You speak as if you admire Netherian engineering, she observed, circling him slowly. Her footsteps created their own rhythm against the floor plating. I admire good craftsmanship wherever I find it. Joran shifted to face her, unperturbed by her predatory movement. I'm a sound engineer by trade was anyway, before the war. Your people build ships that sing, whether you meant to or not. She stopped directly in front of him. At full height, she towered nearly 7 feet, her crystalline skin refracting the cell's lighting into prismatic patterns that typically induced psychological distress in humans. Joran simply looked up at her with that same calm interest. I'm Kestra Vex, senior interrogator of the Third Fleet, she announced, activating her empathic resonance. The ability sent invisible tendrils of energy toward his mind, seeking emotional vulnerabilities. You will tell me everything about your mission, your fleet positions, and your defensive capabilities. Instead of the expected mental recoil, she felt something unprecedented. Joran's consciousness seemed to harmonize with her probe, not resisting, but somehow ... complementing it. The sensation was so startling, she took an involuntary step backward. Interesting technique, Joran said thoughtfully. It's like ... emotional echolocation. The frequency feels familiar, actually. There's a type of whale song back on Earth that uses similar principles. Kestra stared at him, her empathic training unable to process what had just occurred. No human should be able to perceive her abilities, much less respond to them with academic interest. What are you? She whispered, her usual interrogation protocols failing her completely. Joran's smile widened, and he gestured to the space around them. Right now? I'm someone who's figured out that your ship's emotional resonance system is absolutely extraordinary. And unless I'm mistaken, you're someone who's never encountered a human who could hear it before." For the first time in her military career, senior interrogator Kestra Vex found herself speechless. Outside the cell, the Void Caller continued its journey through deep space, its hull singing a song that only two beings aboard could truly understand, and one of them was supposed to be her enemy. The war between their species had lasted 15 years, built on the assumption that humans and Netherians were fundamentally incompatible. But as Kestra looked down at Joran Hatch, still sitting peacefully in his cell with that enigmatic smile, she began to suspect that everything they'd been told might be wrong. The ship's harmony seemed to grow stronger around them, as if the metal itself approved of this impossible moment of understanding between natural enemies. 3 days passed before Kestra returned to Cell 7 Alpha, though she told herself it was merely part of standard interrogation protocol. The truth that she'd spent those days researching human acoustic theory in the ship's database was something she refused to acknowledge, even to herself. When the cell door opened, Joran looked up from what appeared to be a complex arrangement of small, metal fragments arranged in precise geometric patterns across the floor. "Commander Vex," he greeted her with that same unsettling calm. "Perfect timing. I was just testing a theory about harmonic interference patterns." She stepped carefully around his makeshift installation, noting how the pieces seemed to vibrate, almost imperceptibly in response to the ship's ambient frequencies. "You've been busy. Your maintenance crew throws away some fascinating materials." These fragments came from old resonance dampeners, probably 50 years old, judging by the SD crystalline lattice structure. Joran picked up one piece, holding it to the light. "Your ancestors were artists as much as engineers." Despite herself, Kestra felt a flicker of pride. The old masters believed that function and beauty were inseparable. Modern Netherian ships prioritize efficiency over ... aesthetic harmony. "That's a shame." Joran placed the fragment back in its precise position. "Beauty isn't decoration, it's information. When something looks right, it usually works better too." He glanced up at her. "May I ask you something?" Protocol demanded she maintain interrogator dominance, but her curiosity won. "Proceed." "Yesterday, when you used that empathic resonance technique, how long have your people been able to do that?" The question caught her off guard. "It is not your place to—" "I'm not asking for military intelligence," Joran interrupted gently. "I'm asking about the music of it, because that's what it was, your consciousness creating harmonics with mine. I've never experienced anything like it." Kestra found herself sinking into the chair normally reserved for intimidation purposes. "We call it Sethriel, the touching of minds through emotional frequencies. It develops during adolescence for most Netherians, but—" She paused, realizing she was sharing classified physiological data with a prisoner. "But not for you?" Joran's perception was unervingly accurate. "My abilities manifested early and ... differently. I was fitted with neural inhibitors at age 12 to prevent complications." She touched the barely visible device behind her left ear unconsciously. Joren nodded thoughtfully. "That explains the dissonance I'm hearing in your personal frequency. There's a beautiful melody trying to emerge, but something's dampening it." He leaned forward with genuine concern. "Doesn't that hurt?" The simple question hit her like a physical blow. No one, not her commanders, not the medical technicians, not even her own family, had ever asked if the inhibitors caused her pain. They were a necessary tool for controlling her excessive empathic sensitivity, nothing more. "I function adequately," she managed. "That's not what I asked." Joran's voice carried a gentleness she'd never heard from another being. "May I show you something?" Against every regulation she'd sworn to uphold, Kestra nodded. Joren began to hum again, but this time he gestured for her to place her hand on one of the metal fragments. As his voice found the ship's natural resonance, the fragment began to vibrate in her palm. The sensation traveled up her arm, and for just a moment, she felt something extraordinary a harmony between her suppressed empathic abilities and the musical frequencies surrounding them. The neural inhibitor behind her ear sparked once, then resumed its normal function. But in that brief instant of freedom, Kestra experienced something she'd forgotten was possible, the pure joy of her natural gifts functioning without restraint. "Your people aren't just empathic," Joran said softly. "You're synesthetic. You experience emotions as music, don't you? When that inhibitor glitched just now, I could see it in your face. You weren't just feeling the harmony. You were seeing it, tasting it, living it." Tears she didn't understand began flowing down her crystalline cheeks, refracting into tiny rainbows in the cell's lighting. "How do you know these things? How can a human understand what I've never understood about myself?" Joran smiled with infinite sadness. "Because I'm a musician who spent his life studying the intersection of sound, emotion, and perception. And because right now, you're the most beautiful symphony I've ever encountered, even with half your instruments silenced." For the next 4 hours, standard interrogation protocols were completely abandoned as Kestra Vex found herself learning about her own species. Gifts from a human prisoner who saw her not as a weapon to be feared, but as an artist forced into silence. When she finally left the cell, her official report contained 3 words: "Interrogation continuing tomorrow." But her personal log, encrypted and hidden, contained thousands of words about frequencies, harmonics, and the terrifying possibility that everything she'd been taught about her own limitations might be a lie constructed by those who feared what she might become if her true abilities were unleashed. The corridor outside Cell 7 Alpha had become Kestra's sanctuary, though she would never admit it aloud. For the past week, she had found excuses to linger there during shift changes, drawn by the subtle alterations in the ship's harmonic patterns that seemed to emanate from Joran's cell. Even through the soundproofed walls, she could sense the musical experiments he conducted, and more disturbing still, the way her own neural inhibitor responded to them with increasingly frequent glitches. When she entered the cell that morning, she found Joran surrounded by what looked like a primitive but sophisticated sound laboratory. He'd somehow convinced the maintenance droids to provide him with additional fragments, wires salvaged from defunct systems, and even what appeared to be components from the ship's backup communication array. "Before you ask," he said without looking up from his work, "I traded my daily rations for these parts. Apparently, your engineering staff finds human food allocation amusing enough to make deals." Kestra examined his setup more closely. The arrangement had evolved far beyond simple acoustic experimentation. He'd created what looked like a bioresonance feedback loop, complete with sensors that must have been adapted from medical equipment. "What is this?" she asked, though part of her already knew the answer. "A way to help you hear yourself properly." Joran finally met her eyes, and she was struck by the intensity of his focus. "I've been analyzing the frequency patterns your neural inhibitor produces, and I think I've figured out how to create temporary interference fields. Nothing permanent, nothing that would damage the device, but maybe enough to let your natural abilities surface for a few minutes at a time." The implications were staggering. That would be considered sabotage of military hardware. "The penalty is worth it," Joran interrupted. "Kestra, in the past week, I've watched you discover things about your own species that your scientists apparently never bothered to investigate. Your empathic abilities aren't just weapons. They're a form of consciousness that could revolutionize how different species communicate. You're being artificially limited by people who don't understand what they're suppressing." She wanted to argue to invoke duty and protocol, but the memory of that brief moment of harmonic freedom haunted her. "Even if what you say is true, The risks, I've already tested it on myself. Joran activated a small device, and immediately the cell filled with a complex pattern of overlapping frequencies. Human brains aren't naturally empathic like yours, but they can be temporarily enhanced. Watch. He closed his eyes and extended his hand toward her. Suddenly, Kestra could feel his emotions as clearly as if they were her own curiosity, determination, and underneath it all, a deep, aching loneliness that mirrored her own isolation. "You've been alone your whole life, too," she whispered, the words emerging without conscious thought. "Since the war started, yes." Joran opened his eyes, and she saw them glistening with unshed tears. "My entire research team was killed in the Centauri bombardment. I've been the only human studying interspecies acoustic communication for 3 years now." The neural inhibitor behind her ear began its familiar interference pattern, trying to suppress the empathic connection. But Joran's frequency generator created just enough disruption to keep her abilities partially active. For the first time in 20 years, Kestra experienced the full spectrum of emotional resonance her body was designed to process. It was overwhelming and beautiful and terrifying. "I can feel the ship," she gasped, her hands gripping the edges of the chair. "Every consciousness aboard, the crew, the prisoners, even the navigation AI. They're all connected, all part of a massive symphony, and I'm supposed to be the conductor. But I've been listening to it through broken instruments my entire life." Joran moved closer, his presence serving as an anchor in the flood of sensation. "Easy. Don't try to process everything at once. Focus on one frequency at a time." "There's so much pain," she whispered. "The other prisoners, they're not just afraid, they're mourning. They have families, children, dreams. Double quotes her voice. How have I been interrogating people for 8 years without feeling their humanity? Because someone decided that making you feel their humanity would make you too dangerous to control." Joran's voice carried a bitter edge. "But Kestra, look deeper. Feel what's happening right now, in this moment." She extended her awareness cautiously and gasped at what she discovered. Throughout the ship, crew members were pausing in their duties, their emotional states shifting towards something unprecedented: curiosity instead of hostility, wonder instead of fear. The changes were subtle but unmistakable, and they all seemed to radiate from this single cell where an Etherian and a human were learning to truly see each other. "The frequency patterns we're generating," she breathed. "They're affecting the entire ship." "Emotional resonance is contagious," Joran confirmed. "When two consciousness harmonize, it creates ripples that can spread throughout any connected system. Your ship isn't just carrying a crew, it's carrying a potential symphony of interspecies understanding." The neural inhibitor's interference suddenly intensified, sending sharp spikes of pain through Kestra's skull. Her natural abilities slammed back into suppressed mode so abruptly she cried out, and warning indicators began flashing on Joran's makeshift equipment. "Someone's noticed the change in ship-wide bio-readings," he said grimly, quickly dismantling his frequency generator. "You need to leave, now." But it was already too late. The cell door burst open, and Commander Thane Korvik entered with a full security detail, his scarred features twisted into an expression of cold fury. His eyes took in the improvised laboratory, Kestra's obvious distress, and the still glowing fragments scattered across the floor. "Senior Interrogator Vex," he said in the tone reserved for formal accusations, "you will report to command immediately. This prisoner has been scheduled for immediate execution under suspicion of psychological warfare." As the guards moved to restrain Joran, Kestra felt something break inside her chest, not the inhibitor, but something deeper and more fundamental. For a brief, shining moment, she had experienced what her people were truly capable of, and now they were going to kill the only being in the galaxy who understood. "Commander," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos in her mind. "I request formal sanctuary proceedings for this prisoner under Article 7 of the Netherian Military Code." Korvik's eyes widened in shock. Article 7 hadn't been invoked. In over a century, it granted protection to individuals whose death would result in the irreplaceable loss of strategic knowledge. "You're claiming this human possesses critical intelligence?" Kestra looked at Joran one last time, memorizing his face before everything changed forever. "I'm claiming he possesses the key to ending this war." The command chamber aboard the Voidcaller had been designed to intimidate, its soaring crystalline walls amplifying and focusing sound in ways that made even whispered conversations feel like pronouncements from the void. Kestra stood at its center, still in restraints, facing a tribunal of 5 senior officers whose empathic abilities combined could strip away every secret she'd ever harbored. Commander Korvik sat at the center of the curved bench, his scarred hands folded as he reviewed the charges on his display. "Senior Interrogator Vex, you stand accused of fraternization with enemy personnel, unauthorized modification of military equipment, and most seriously, invoking sanctuary protection for a confirmed terrorist." "The charges are accurate," Kestra replied, her voice carrying clearly in the acoustically perfect chamber, "but incomplete." Admiral Nessa Vrex, the highest-ranking Netherian present, leaned forward with interest. Her ancient face bore the distinctive, crystalline scarring that came from decades of unfiltered empathic use. She was among the last generation to serve without neural inhibitors. "Explain?" "The human, Joran Hatch, has demonstrated capabilities that fundamentally challenge our understanding of interspecies empathic potential. His knowledge represents not just strategic value, but the possibility of evolutionary advancement for our people." Korvik's laugh was harsh. "You would have us believe that this terrorist musician possesses secrets our scientists have overlooked for centuries?" "I would have you listen," Kestra said simply. She activated the small recording device she'd hidden in her utility pouch 1 of Joran's improvised frequency generators, modified to replay the harmonic patterns they'd discovered together. As the complex frequencies filled the chamber, something unprecedented began to happen. The 5 tribunal members, all powerful empaths despite their inhibitors, began to resonate with the recorded patterns. Admiral Vrex's eyes widened as her ancient, scarred neural pathways responded to stimuli they hadn't processed in decades. Commander Korvik's hostile expression shifted to one of wonder as harmonics he'd never imagined possible washed over his consciousness. "By the void," whispered Captain Zara Nex, the youngest member of the tribunal, "I can feel ... everything. The entire ship, all of our minds, connected in ways I never dreamed possible." "This is impossible," Korvik breathed, but his words lacked conviction. "Humans don't possess empathic capabilities." "They don't need to," Kestra explained, her restraints forgotten in the moment of revelation. "They possess something equally valuable, the ability to create bridges between different forms of consciousness through harmonic resonance. Joran hasn't just demonstrated human potential. He's revealed the next stage of Netherian evolution." "Admiral." Vrex stood slowly, her ancient form moving with renewed vitality as the frequencies continued to wash over the chamber. "Show us the prisoner." 20 minutes later, Joran was escorted into the command chamber under heavy guard, his hands bound, but his expression calm. The acoustic properties of the space clearly fascinated him. Kestra could see him analyzing the sound patterns, even as he faced potential execution. "Human," Admiral Vrex addressed him directly, "you stand accused of psychological warfare against our species. How do you answer?" Joran met her gaze steadily. "I answer that warfare implies intent to harm. Everything I've done has been designed to help your people understand their own capabilities more fully. By sabotaging our neural inhibitor technology, by demonstrating that your neural inhibitors are sabotaging you, Joran's voice carried easily in the crystalline space. "Admiral, with respect, you're among the last Netherians to remember what natural empathic abilities feel like. Tell me, when you experienced those frequencies just now, did they feel like weapons, or did they feel like coming home?" The silence that followed was profound. Admiral Vrex closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, they held a depth of emotion that hadn't been seen in an Netherian command chamber for generations. "Like coming home," she whispered. "Your people aren't just empaths," Joran continued, his voice growing stronger with conviction. "You're living conduits for consciousness itself. The neural inhibitors don't just suppress your abilities. They're cutting you off from your own evolutionary potential. And more importantly, they're preventing you from forming the kinds of connections that could end this war." Commander Korvik stood abruptly. "Even if what you claim is true, you're suggesting we compromise our military effectiveness based on the theories of a single human prisoner." "I'm suggesting you test those theories," Joran replied. "Give me access to your ship's communication array for 1 hour. Let me broadcast a harmonic sequence to both human and Netherian vessels in this sector. If I'm wrong, you can execute me for treason. If I'm right, if you're right," Admiral Vrex prompted. "If I'm right, you'll witness the first genuine peace. Negotiations in 15 years. The tribunal members exchanged glances, their empathic abilities still partially enhanced by the lingering effects of Joran's frequencies. In that moment of expanded consciousness, they could feel something that had been missing from every previous attempt at diplomacy-hope. 3 hours later, the Void Caller's communication array powered to full strength, broadcasting a complex pattern of interwoven human and Netherian harmonic frequencies across 12 star systems. The signal was designed not to carry words, but emotions, longing, curiosity, the desire for understanding, and underneath it all, the simple recognition of shared consciousness. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Human ships began altering course toward Netherian positions, not to attack, but to listen. Netherian crews found themselves reaching out empathically to their human counterparts, their inhibitors overwhelmed by the sheer emotional resonance of the broadcast dot in the command chamber. Kestra stood beside Joran as they watched the tactical displays fill with unprecedented activity, dozens of ships from both species converging not for battle, but for the galaxy's first attempt at harmonic diplomacy. "It's working," she breathed, her own inhibitor finally giving up its struggle against the overwhelming frequencies surrounding them. "It's just the beginning," Joran replied, his hand finding hers as the ship around them sang with the voices of two species learning to harmonize for the first time in 15 years. Above them, Admiral Vrex smiled for the first time in decades as she issued orders that would change the course of galactic history. "All ships, stand down weapons. Prepare for first contact protocols. And someone get these neural inhibitors off my command staff. It's time we remembered how to truly listen." 6 months after what historians would later call the harmonic convergence, the Joint Research Station Symphony drifted in the neutral zone between human and Netherian space, its hybrid architecture a testament to what two species could accomplish when they truly listened to each other. Kestra stood in the station's central observatory, watching the latest group of diplomatic trainees practice their harmonic communication exercises in the zero-gravity chamber below. Her crystalline skin no longer bore the pale, suppressed glow of neural inhibition. The devices had been permanently removed 3 months ago, along with those of nearly 70% of the Netherian military. The change in her people had been profound. Without artificial limits on their empathic abilities, they had rediscovered not just their own emotional depth, but their capacity for genuine connection with other species. "The Centaurian delegation arrived this morning," Joran said, entering the observatory with 2 cups of coffee, a beverage that had become surprisingly popular among Netherians once they discovered its harmonic effects on consciousness. They're eager to begin acoustic translation protocols. Apparently, their species communicates primarily through subsonic frequencies. Kestra accepted the coffee gratefully, savoring both its warmth and the comfortable familiarity of their daily routine. Their partnership had evolved far beyond the prisoner-interrogator dynamic of their first meeting, though neither of them had yet found words for what it had become. The Andorian Trade Consortium sent their formal application for harmony training. "Yesterday as well," she reported. "It seems every species in 3 sectors wants to learn our techniques now that the war has ended." The peace treaty signed 4 months earlier had been unlike anything in galactic history. Not a document of law, terms and conditions, but a living composition of harmonic frequencies that represented both species' commitment to understanding. It was performed regularly at diplomatic gatherings, with new voices and instruments added as more worlds joined what was becoming known as the Galactic Harmony Project. "Sometimes I still can't believe it worked," Joran admitted, settling beside her at the observation window. 15 years of war ended by helping people remember how to listen to each other. Not ended, Kestra corrected gently. Transformed. The conflict is still there, the competing needs for resources, territory, security. But now we address those conflicts as a symphony addresses dissonance, by finding ways to resolve tension into harmony rather than letting it build to destructive crescendos. Below them, a mixed group of humans and Nefarians were learning to create musical compositions that translated directly into emotional experiences. The sight still filled Kestra with wonder her people's natural empathic abilities enhanced and focused through human acoustic technology, creating new forms of art and communication that neither species could have achieved alone. "Director Vex," a voice called from the observatory entrance. Lieutenant Commander Tess Nakamura, formerly of the human colonial fleet, and now the station's head of intercultural studies, approached with a datapad in hand. "The Council has approved your proposal for the deep space exploration mission." Kestra felt Joran's immediate interest through their empathic link another development that would have been impossible before the removal of her inhibitors. Their consciousness had become naturally synchronized over the months of working together, creating a partnership that enhanced both their abilities. "All 6 species have agreed to participate?" she asked, accepting the pad. "All 6 plus 2. More that weren't on the original list. The Vegan Collective and the Rings of Saturn both want to send representatives. It seems the idea of a truly integrated crew exploring uncharted space has captured imaginations across the galaxy." The deep space mission had been Kestra's vision, a joint exploration, vessel crewed by representatives from multiple species, using harmonic communication as their primary diplomatic tool. Where previous first contact situations had often ended in conflict, this ship would approach new civilizations with music, empathy, and the hard-won wisdom of species that had learned to find harmony in their differences. "When do we depart?" Joran asked, and Kestra felt his excitement resonate through their link. 3 months, Nakamura replied. Just enough time to complete the final crew integrations and install the new harmonic communication arrays. After the lieutenant commander departed, Kestra and Joran remained in comfortable silence, watching the diplomatic trainees below as they created increasingly complex harmonic structures. The music they generated was beautiful in ways that transcended simple aesthetic appreciation. It was the sound of consciousness, itself learning to sing in harmony with other forms of awareness. "Are you nervous about leaving all this behind?" Joran asked eventually, gesturing toward the bustling station around them. "Nervous? No." Kestra considered the question carefully. "Excited, perhaps. We've proven that different species can learn to harmonize. Now it's time to discover what other forms of consciousness might be waiting among the stars, and what new symphonies we might create together." Joran smiled, that same warm expression that had first puzzled and then captivated her in the detention. cell where their story began. From interrogation chamber to exploration vessel. That's quite a composition we've written together. Written and are still writing, Kestra corrected, her empathic senses picking up the deeper currents of his thoughts and emotions. The affection, respect, and something deeper that had grown between them over these months of shared discovery. I believe humans have an expression about songs that never end. Endless melodies, Joran confirmed, his hand finding hers as they watched their students below create yet another impossible harmony between different forms of consciousness, though I prefer to think of them as songs that keep finding new movements, new themes to explore. Outside the observatory windows, the stars beckoned with the promise of undiscovered civilizations, each potentially carrying their own unique forms of consciousness and communication. In 3 months, the exploration vessel New Symphony would carry its integrated crew into the unknown, armed not with weapons, but with music, empathy, and the revolutionary knowledge that understanding between different forms of life was always possible. You just had to learn how to listen. As the station continued its slow rotation around the distant star they had chosen as the neutral zone's heart, Kestra and Joran began planning their next movement in the grand composition they had started in that small detention cell. Neither of them knew what musical challenges awaited among the stars, but they faced them together, confident that any dissonance could be resolved into harmony if approached with patience, creativity, and the willingness to truly hear what others were trying to say. The war between their species had ended not with victory or defeat, but with the discovery that consciousness itself was a collaborative art form. And like all the best compositions, it was most beautiful when performed not in isolation, but in harmony with others who brought their own unique voices to the eternal song of existence. The galaxy would never sound the same again.